Hi, this is Kevin with Map Practical. This is Applications of GIS Lab 2. It's going to be proportional and graduated symbols. So here we are in Arc Pro. Let's just start a new Arc catalog. You could call this something like African Aid. That would work, right? And then make sure you put it in the right place. I'm going to put it in my documents inside my GIS apps folder there. And definitely tell it to create a new folder for this project. Say OK. So it'll create the project for me, and then let's take a look in the Windows environment. Let's see here. So there's my GIS apps, and inside here I'm going to need to make a raw data folder. So I just want to be organized. In this particular lab, staying organized is really important. So there's raw data, and then I've got some other data I want to add to it. From over here, I'll just make a copy. The world countries is going to be the GIS data that we need to join to, and then I'm going to make another folder for Gapminder data, which is where we're going to get our information from. All right, so there's that, and then I'll go back to Pro, and if I go to the folders and refresh the African Aid, hopefully we will see our raw data in there. Yes, excellent. And under the world countries, there's just a shape file of all the world's countries. And I want to add that to a new map. So here we go. It's going to open up a new map tab. So there's all the countries of the world. That's in WGS 84, most likely. And oh, it looks like I have. I'm just going to make a copy and make sure I keep a nice clean copy for my other files. There we go. All right, so you can double check that. We can take a look at the properties for the map and see that it is in WGS 84. Okay, we're after an Albers equal area conic though. So let's go ahead and change that under projected coordinate systems, continental, Africa, Albers equal area conic, and we definitely want the one that's WGS, so we'll just take a quick look. Yep, it's WGS, so we'll say OK. There we go. And we're going to zoom in, and definitely we want to be working just with the continent of Africa. So what we're going to do today is we're going to compare some data we get from Gapminder that's actually been pre-processed. It's World Bank data that looks at things like aid given to African countries. There's a bit of a, you could almost call it an argument in aid circles with some African economists saying that aid has not helped increase things like GDP for the countries that have been receiving it. And now we have about 60 years of data. So the other side says, well, GDP isn't the best measure. Just because we give aid to individuals doesn't mean that they're going to create more money in the GDP of the overall government, that there are other things that can show us that the aid is working, like reduced infant mortality and longer life expectancy and things like that. So we're going to take a look at all that. So first things first, let's take a look at the attribute table for all countries. And we're going to do a select by attributes. And if we take a look under the expression and find continent, it's down here somewhere. There it is. So continent is equal to, and we choose Africa. Okay, there we go. So now we've got all the countries of Africa, and we'll right click there. Oh, before we do that, we need to go to our catalog tab. We need to go into our geodatabase, and we need to make a new feature data set, and that's going to be called African Aid. Oh, actually, I'm going to call this one Africa Data. Oops, because it's more than just aid data. It's going to be GDP and a bunch of things. And then we're going to go ahead and use the current map, which we've already set to that Albers. And we'll run that. Super. And let's see, it's in there. Great. And now if we go over to the map, we can export out these countries that are selected. So down to Data, Export Features, and go inside of our geodatabase into there, and name this Africa. Let's see, what did I name them? just Africa. Okay, so this is all the countries in Africa. We'll say all right. And it probably added it. I'm going to go ahead and clear my selection, turn off the other countries, and there we go. And turn off that topo map. I can go in my map frame here and go to general and change the background color. Maybe I'll go with like a light gray or something. And I can change these guys over here under properties. Maybe go with like a orange or so. That looks kind of nice. Let's see. Oh, maybe it needs to be a little bit brighter. There we go. All right. So we can save our project. And now we got to go get some data. So I send you guys off to the Gapminder data site. So let me pull that up. Now, Gapminder is the work of a Swedish health professor, public health professor named Hans Rosling. He passed away a couple years ago, but his family is now running Gapminder, and he was just upset with this gap between people's perceptions of the world and how it's doing and the actual data. So he wanted to have a place that was data centric. So if we just type in GDP here, you'll get a number of GDP, and the one we're after is GDP per capita, US inflation adjusted. You click on it and it'll give you the table. So what we've got is GDP for the whole world from 1960 all the way up to 2019 in this one. And you can look at it in different ways. You can look at it as a bubble chart or as a line chart. And when I send you back to the site to find a couple more variables to compare to aid, you might want to explore the data by looking at it that way. And then, you know, you can download CSV. We'll start with an XLSX, and we'll put that into our, we've got to find where we're working today, African aid, into the raw data, into the Gapminder folder. And it's just going to be an Excel spreadsheet. Save that out. Okay, and then we'll go back one and we'll type in aid. And aid received. And then aid received per person. Okay, because we're comparing people, right? So there are all the countries of the world again, and this one goes to 2018, so we'll have to take off the 2019 data in GDP. So we'll download that guy as well. It's going in the right folder. Really interesting website. I definitely suggest checking it out. All right, so that's done. And let's take a look here at our folder. Is this where we're working today? Yep, so there we go. So then we're just going to open up the GDP per capita in Excel and say enable edit, and then let me get over here to my instructions and make sure that I'm doing everything right. Okay, so this data is pretty messy. There's a lot of things we have to fix up so that we can use it inside of GIS. So we're going to join based on the country name, but ArcPro and ArcDesktop for that matter doesn't like the header attribute columns to be named in just pure numbers. So we'll have to change that. All these blank spaces, they're no good because those will come in as nulls, and GIS doesn't deal with nulls so well. So first things first, we want to go ahead and fix this. So if we just select this first blank square, go up to Find and Select, and then down to Go to Special, and tell it we want to select blanks, and hit OK. Now all the blanks in there are selected. I'm just going to type in a 0, and it put it there in my first blank. And if I hit Control Enter, boom. So it just replaced all the blanks with zeros. So that was pretty easy. Now I'm going to add an extra row above Afghanistan here. And what we want to do is change these 1960, 61, and so forth into a alphanumeric. So I'm going to select that first blank row right there. And I'm going to have to do an equal sign, and then quotation marks, GDP, underscore, quotation marks, the ampersand, and then click on 1960. Oops, got a problem there. What did I do wrong? Oh, yeah, not a proper ampersand. There we go. And now click on 1960. Cool, and then I hit enter, and boom, see how it just created a new title for me. But it is a formula, so we'll have to change that in a second. But so I'll just drag this all the way over and create new header labels for each one of my attribute columns. And we know that we don't need the 2019 data, so we want to get rid of that so that it matches the aid data. As I was saying though, we can't actually have this be formulas, we need it to be real values. So if I select this entire row and I go up here to, or I just hit copy, Control C, and then under paste, I go to just paste values, it'll paste the values in there. And now I can go out here, and Control D will get rid of the marching ants. Now when I select one of them, you'll see it's an actual value. So now row 1 is useless for us, so we can get rid of that. And we want to go ahead and make this header for the countries labeled. All right, so country. All right, so that looks pretty good. We have all the countries in the world, and we're only dealing with Africa, and there's no easy way for us to just find the African countries in here. So we're going to join this data to the African countries in GIS and then re-export the table back out, and then we can go in and start calculating some averages of GDP over this time span and get rid of all these zeros. So we want to save this guy, and then we're going to do a save as, and in our Gapminder data, and what did I save this thing? Yep, GDP per capita underscore per capita. Oh, that's supposed to be an underscore, not a plus. There we go. CSV is the way to go. You could save it as an Excel, and let's go ahead and just have a copy of it as an Excel, but I'm also going to do a save as and change it to a comma delimited. Not any of these fancy ones up here with this UTF-8, but just the good old plain comma delimited CSV. And that's because you need a special plugin in Arc Pro, a Microsoft plugin, to read the Excel documents. And so it's just easier to do it with a CSV. All right, and then you want to close Excel. You don't want to leave the spreadsheet open when we're going to be joining data. So back to Pro, and then let me just make sure I got everything right on the instructions. All right, you would do the same cleanup for the aid file as well and get it ready to go, okay? The only difference is that the change of the column is going to be aid underscore in the year instead of GDP. Okay, so if I take my African data set up here and I go to joins and relates, choose add join, and then I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the folders for this class or for this particular project into my raw data, into Gapminder, and then I'm going to choose my GDP per capita CSV. Say OK. And the join field in the African countries feature data set is going to be name long. So we got to find that. It's down here a little ways down. There we go. Oh, wait. No. Did I miss it? Probably did. It's in here somewhere. Name short. Where's my name long? There it is, name long, and then country is the proper one, and we're going to keep all features. Okay, there we go. This is the all countries attribute table. That's not the one we want to look at. Let's look at Africa and look at the attribute table and just check and see if our join worked. So if we scroll over, come on, work with me. There we go. There we go. So we've got GDP for the years. There's a few nulls, so if we go back to country, oops, 86, we got to go all the way back to 60. That's 68, 67, come on, and a couple more. There we go. So there's the country, and now let's go ahead and sort it by country and scroll up. Oh, Zimbabwe's on top. Just trying to find the, there we go. So there's 3 nulls, and the nulls are because there's no data in the Excel spreadsheet for those particular countries. If we go back over, we'll be able to see which ones they are. They are Somalia, Somaliland, and Western Sahara. So both Somaliland and Somalia, those are true failed states that don't really have a government that's reporting GDP to the World Bank or the UN. Western Sahara is a disputed territory with Morocco, so we'll just display those as no data on our maps, okay? All right. So the next move then is to make this join permanent. I think I'm going to go in, I don't know if this is actually showing up too well for you guys, and just make the background a little bit darker. There we go. All right. So let me just check my instructions. Okay. Before we make the join permanent, actually we need to export this back out as a text file, so then we can take back into Excel and continue fixing the data up. So let's go to our Africa data, right click, and we can go to data and then export it, not the features, this time we're going to export the table. So where do we want to put it? It's going to be in the folder, in the African Aid, raw data, Gapminder, right? So that's where it's headed. And then the output name, let me just double check. Yep, I can actually just copy it right out of my Word document over here, which is the instructions. Join, you have to actually put the .txt on it, and you definitely want to do it like that. And then under the fields, we don't need to keep anything except for the data that we're interested in, which is all of our years and the country. So all the extra data from the world feature data set we don't need. So we'll go down here and hold down Shift, boom, and get rid of it. Great, so now it's going to just export the country name and the GDP from 2018 back to 1960. I think everything is right. We'll hit OK. It should be done. Great. I'm going to go ahead and save the ArcMap project, or ArcPro project, and go back to our folder. So here we go. So it came out as a text file. Now if you double click on that, it's probably just going to open it in a rich text editor. We need to get it in Excel. So we're going to open up a blank Excel doc. Let that run. And here. And then from there we can go to File, Open, and then Browse, and then get back to our original raw data, Gapminder, and then you're going to have to tell Excel to look for all files, and then you should see it in there. So there's that GDP per capita join text. We're going to open that guy, and this will open up a text import wizard. So we definitely want to leave this as delimited. Go to next. We're going to tell it that it's comma delimited, not tab, and then next again, and finish. And there we go. So we have all of our data just for the African countries. Now we don't need this OID anymore, so we can delete that column. And now we can get to work. Okay, we've got a lot of holes in the data, right? So for Ethiopia, for example, I'm going to go ahead and sort this. If I go over the data and then sort this and expand the selection, there we go. And then I'm going to go to View and freeze the top row. That just makes it easier for me to look at the data and still keep my headers. So for Algeria, right, you've got data going all the way back to 1960, but for Angola, you don't, right? So what we want to do is take a look at the last one that you have is for 1979. That's interesting. Why is, because usually Angola, I'm going to go ahead and sort it again. Why did it? Usually Angola is on top, but for some reason today, yeah, well, that makes some sense. Anyways, no big deal. 1970 is the last one we have. So GDP across the entire globe grows on an average of 3%. This is how our global economics is arranged to be in constant growth mode. You can go back and there's different amounts of growth for different countries, but in the end, 3% is roughly what all countries are expected to grow to have a healthy economy. So we could get into a situation of trying to figure out what the right rate for each country is, but it's probably easier for us just to use a global average. So that's what we'll do. So starting in the first bit of data from 1980, we need to get a value for 1960. So we'll click on this field right here. We'll hit an equal sign up there, and it's going to be the one before it, the 1980 value, divided by 1.03. And we hit enter. And that's a 3% reduction from the 80 value, and then we just slide that guy over, boom, like that, and then it takes it all the way to the 1960. Now you'll notice you've got some that are going back in time, and this takes a little bit of time. You just have to click on this guy, and then put the equal sign, and then the one before it, and then divided by 1.03, hit enter, and then take it back, and that will fix these all up. The calculation that we're going to do for the percent change over time is going to be based on the oldest value, so the 1960 value, and in this particular case, the 2018 value, right? So you can do that once you have those values calculated. For this country, we have only this one value in 2010. I know it's a rough estimate, but what can we do? So we could calculate back. I've already showed you how to do that. How would we go forward? Well, so it's going to be equals, right? And then the value before. And then instead of divided, it's going to be times 1.03. And then pull that out to 2018. There we go. All right, cool. So there's a number of different things we could look at. We could look at the percent change in GDP. So if we were to do a per change GDP, that is one calculation we could make. All right. But you end up with some pretty big numbers. So some of these countries have had like 3,000% change in GDP over this 59-year period. Some of them have a negative GDP, so they're producing less than they were in 1960. Over the years, that 3,000 to negative 70 something or negative 60 seemed to be a little bit much. So I came up with another way we could look at it. We could also look at this trend. So what is the amount that it has changed yearly going forward? So that one would be something along the lines of a trend underscore GDP, right? Before I would calculate these, obviously I need to fix all the zeros in my spreadsheet, at least to 1960 and to 2018. But the percent change, if I go ahead and just bring over the instructions, you can see that to get our percent change, it's the new value minus the old value divided by the old value and then times 100 to convert it to a percent. All right, and then this is what the formula would look like in the Excel formula bar. So Control C, just copy that guy, and then I go here and then just paste that in. V, and then you got to just check it. So 2018 is the old value. It's BH, which is here. Great. And then just scroll over and make sure it's capturing, yep, the 1960 value. And then back to where we were. And then hit enter. And so in that time period, this country, Algeria, has had a 91% increase in its GDP. And if you just double click on this little guy here, you'll get all of those values. Now, you'll see that there's not values that weren't calculated. That's because I haven't finished fixing the spreadsheet, but I just want to move on. So you've got negative 36%, you've got 1,800 and some percent change there. So those values, yes, you can map those. I think it's just harder for people to understand percent changes in the thousands. So what about a percent trend per year? So what did it take on average to get to that number every year? Well, looking again over here, that's this formula, right? So annual percent GDP trend is the new value divided by the old value with an exponent of 1 over the period minus 1. So the period is 59 years, so that ends up being 58 minus the 1 times 100. And this is what it looks like as far as a formula for the Excel formula bar. So I'll copy that and then put that right over here. Paste it in and just make sure it's getting the right numbers, 2018. Yep, and 1960, and then hit enter, and there we go. And then, of course, you can format these guys and get rid of some of these decimal places. Number with 2 decimal places is usually plenty good for anything like that. Let's go ahead and calculate the rest of them. Whoop, so there we go, and then format those cells. Number, 2 decimal places, okay. All right, so now you've got a 1.17% increase per year over the 59-year period, right? And we still have these errors because I hadn't fixed the rest of the spreadsheet. Great, so then you would, of course, save it, and then File, save as, and put it in your Gapminder and make sure that you name it. This is actually a join, but it's a, yep, CSV, and save it out. I'm not going to save it because it's incomplete, right? So there's still all these holes in it, but this is basically what you do. And then we do the same thing for the aid. And some people might ask, why would you do 3% increases with aid? Well, it turns out that globally, all the developed countries have committed to spending about 0.7, so basically under 1% of their GDP on international aid to the developing countries. However, most developed countries don't spend it or even commit to their full amount for the full funding. But it is tied to their GDP, and since their GDP should be going up 3% per year, then we should expect aid to also go up 3% per year. So that's why we'll use that same common number in our aid spreadsheet that we'll be fixing. Okay, so real quick, let me just do some background stuff where I copy the data that we're going to use over. So I've already finished a couple of these spreadsheets and I have them ready to go. So there's that join, and that's my aid, and there is my great, Control C, and I'll just put those over here. There we go. So I've got my aid per capita join in a CSV and my GDP capita join in a CSV, and so that's the complete finished spreadsheets. And now we can go back to Pro, and we have to remove all joins from our previous session. Great, so now there's nothing in there. And now I can right click again, go to joins and relates, add a join, and it's not going to be this text file this time. We're going to have to go into our folder, and it's going to be, oh, I know what the deal is. First things first, I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to go over to my catalog, and I'm going to have to go to my folders, African Aid, and say refresh, and then double check that those new spreadsheets that I put over there still doesn't look like they've shown up. Let's refresh again. This is one of the quirks in Pro that bother me, that the data, even when you refresh, doesn't necessarily show up. So let's see. It's definitely in there, right? We've got our CSVs in there. We can try the tool again and see if it sees it regardless. Africa, joins and relays, add join. Let's navigate to our folder. Gapminder, yep, so it is in there. So even though we can't see it over in the catalog view, it's here. So here's our GDP per capita join, V2 for me. That's just me keeping track of my stuff. And then it's going to be those same fields, right? So it's going to be name long and country, keep all features, say OK, and then take a look at the attribute table. We can bring that up and then scroll over and make sure that we got our data in there. Yep, so we've got our trend GDP, we've got our normal 3 nulls, which is probably those same countries. We'll just show those as no data on our map, and that's great. So we've got all of our data in there. Okay, cool. Let me get my instructions up, make sure I'm on the right track. Bring that back over here. And once we were sure that our data did join, we can export this out. And we're going to go ahead and right click, go down to data, export features, not the table this time, but features. Make sure it's going into our geodatabase, into the feature data set. And I named this one, I believe, yeah, I'll just copy it right out of the lab, Africa GDP join. Because this is our final data of GDP. Now fields, we don't need all these extra fields. Just like we did when we exported the text out, we can get rid of a lot of this extra stuff. In fact, the only thing that we really need is country, percent change GDP, and trend. We don't need any of the other ones. So we can have that one selected on top, scroll all the way down, and get rid of all those, and then go up from 2018 all the way to 1960. And get rid of those. And now we've just got the 3 attributes that we need, and we can say OK. And there it is. And we can go ahead and symbolize that guy. Let's take the appearance, symbology. And instead of a single symbol, we're going to do this as, well, let's look at some proportional symbols and change of GDP. There we go. So we're well on our way to getting this lab moving now. So all we need to do now is go back to our original Africa, unjoin it, join the aid data to it, and the aid is going to be a choropleth underneath the proportional symbols of GDP, and I will demonstrate that in the next video. So that's the end of part 1 of Lab 2 for applications of GIS. Always save. If the video was helpful for you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you soon in part 2. Thanks.